We release this knowing so certainly that it is done, that we say together, and so it is. All right then. It's amazing we have come to the end of another year, and always the last Sunday of the year, the focus is on peace. And it comes right after Christmas, and there's a reason for that. Remember, when we're talking about Christmas, when we're talking about finding the Christ, we're talking about that place where the divine becomes human. That place within us where the divine has become human. We did not create this life that we lead. Our parents did not create this life that we lead. The bodies that we use and express and experience life through while we are here did not create the life that we are. Divine love has created this life out of itself. We are individualized expressions of the divine. And you recall the example that I use is if we had a dark paper, like a construction paper, over the windows and the sunlight could not get in. The sunlight is still perfect. The sun is still shining. But we cannot experience it because there is a veil. There is a veil that is placed there. But if we could take a pin and we could punch little holes in that piece of dark paper, we would see little dots of light enter the room. We could come off to the side and look at them, and we could actually see the light streaking as the light illuminates the dust particles suspended in the air. We could look down on the floor and we could see the little dots of light. Now, it may appear to us in looking at them that they are separate, that there's nothing that connects them. But in truth, they are all that one light that is expressing itself individualized as each and every one of those dots. Now, if we could take one of those dots and we could analyze it, we would find that it is the same stuff and substance as all sunlight, as all sunlight. It comes from the same source. It is the same source, individualized as that dot of light. When we come to that realization of this unity, of the oneness, of the I amness, of the suchness that the mystics tell us about, then we start to experience the presence of the divine in us, as us, and through us. This is the birth of the Christ consciousness within us. Since the divine in and of itself is perfect peace, is perfect love, is perfect oneness, then the truth of our being is that there is that within us that already knows peace. Because we are made of peace. We are made of love. We are individualized expressions of love. So our spiritual journey, as we've been discussing for the year, excuse me, still having trouble with my throat. Need to get a drink of water. Our spiritual journey, if we want to call it a journey, is not a journey without, but rather a journey within. If we read the works of Joseph Campbell, and he talks about the hero's journey, which by the way is kind of the plot for every action movie you've ever seen. But the hero's journey, the hero is an ordinary person, just like everybody else. But the hero feels a call, feels a need to go and find something. There's a problem to be solved. There's a wrong to be righted. And the hero goes off on this quest, on this journey. And along the way has guides along the way, has mentors along the way, has people who tells the hero what he or she is going to experience, what to do when you get to a certain place. And the hero completes the journey and comes back home and is able to bring the gift that it discovered back to the community. But the realization is that they had it all along, and that they didn't have to go on the journey so much because what they were looking for was truly out there somewhere. But in taking the journey, in doing the things that they had to do to grow along the way, they were able to discover that which they already had, to reveal that which they already had. This is the metaphor. This is the journey of you and I trying to discover what we really are, what life really is, what God really is, what love really is, you see. Now, everything that we know, or most things that we know, I won't say everything that we know, has come to us through our experience. And by that I mean the experience of the world. There are things that have come to us through experience of revelation, of intuition, of inspiration, things that have not come to us, experiences that have not come to us in the normal way. Right? And in relating to Christmas stories, I said this was the importance of the virgin birth. This was the importance of the Buddha being born from his mother's side. See? This conscious realization of the experience of the presence of the divine in, as, and through us is not something that comes to us in ordinary ways. It is not a mathematical problem to be solved. It is a revelation, if you want to call it that, an inspiration. It is an intuitive knowing so certain that anything to the opposite cannot enter our consciousness. So our spiritual growth, the reason that we study, the reason that we listen to talks, the reason that we read books, the reason that we sit and engage in our spiritual practices of meditation, of spiritual mind treatment, of affirmations, of visualizations, the reason that we do all these things is that is our hero's journey. That is our quest. These are the things that we need to do to discover that which is already within us. Okay? We're not looking for it out there. It's already within here. So in the East, we have a beautiful example, teaching example of a mirror. Now the mirror in it and of itself is perfectly still. Think of a mirror that is perfectly formed. There's not a blemish in it. Each and every part of the mirror is perfect. And if you look in that mirror, whatever you look at in that mirror, the mirror gives back a perfect reflection of whatever that is. But over time, the mirror becomes covered with dust and dirt and stains. And then if we look at the mirror, we don't see things as they are, but rather we see things as they appear to be, and they appear to be deformed and distorted and blemished. And I think this is what, if we look at the scripture, St. Paul says we were looking through a glass darkly, right? Looking through a dirty window. Don't see things as they are. We see things as we think they are. In Plato's Republic, he gives us the example of the people in the cave who were tied down in such a way that they could only see the shadows on the wall of the cave, and the shadows were of the people and the carts and the animals passing by the road outside the mouth of the cave. And they thought the shadows were real, see? And one day, one of them was able to free the shackles and go outside, and was blinded by the light. Right? When we talk about mystical experiences, one of the common things is the experience of the light. Blinded by the light. And he tried to come back in and tell everybody inside the cave, he said, you know, the world as you believe it to be, it's not that way. There's a whole other world. There's a whole other experience. There's a whole other way of being outside, right outside this entrance. And they didn't believe him, see? They didn't believe him. They thought he was crazy because they hadn't experienced it themselves. Their entire experience was believing the shadows on the wall were their reality. We look into a mirror that's covered with dust and dirt. This is our observation of the world. And we believe that what we are seeing is the truth, is the reality. Excuse me again. Is the way it is. And what our spiritual growth is telling us is, don't identify with the dust. Don't identify with war. Don't identify with violence. Don't identify with hate. Don't identify with separation. Clear the mirror of the chatter of your monkey mind. Clear the mirror of your consciousness from the intellect. This is why it is called the peace that passes understanding, you know. And this is why it comes after Christmas. Remember, one of the last things that Jesus said in the New Testament is, my peace I leave you. My peace I leave you. After we have experienced the Christ, the peace is the natural consequence. Jesus was called the Prince of Peace in the Scripture. But we will never experience the peace that we are looking for if we are looking for it in the dust, if we are looking for it in the dirt on the mirror, if we are looking for it in the human way of thinking. Spinoza tells us that peace is not the absence of war. Right? It's not the cessation of hostilities. It is a way of being. It is a way of living. And the human definition of peace, unfortunately, is if we are not engaged in a conflict right now, we consider that to be at peace. But that's not peace, right? That's the absence or the cessation, or that is the still point in between. You know, if you look at the history of world wars, you know, we kind of have this great conflict, and everyone is exhausted by it. And all they want to do is not fight anymore, not struggle anymore. It's over. We want to rest. We want to be at peace. But even while we are at peace, we begin to prepare again for war. We begin to suspect other countries. They begin to suspect us. We begin to build up our arms. They begin to build up their arms. And that energy comes up again. And we have another big clash. That is the way of the world. That is the way of human consciousness. And we can't identify with that. That is the experience. That is the human condition. But the human condition is not a permanent condition. And the human condition is not the ultimate truth, not the ultimate reality. So when we are talking about peace and what peace is and where are we going to find it and how are we going to find it, what we have to remember is that this peace that we are talking about today is not just the cessation of hostilities. It is the perfect ease. If you think of the divine, the perfect ease, the perfect poise of the divine, not disturbed by any circumstances. And I think that's important to recognize that in the world today, as it is, we might think, well, gee, if I was experiencing perfect peace, all of this other stuff would stop. Everybody else would stop because I want to experience perfect peace. Again, we have to come back to it is a personal inside job. What you are trying to do is to find the Christ within, the divine within, the love within, and experience the peace within and be undisturbed by whatever other people and other places are doing on their journey. That's their journey. It doesn't mean that we don't see a situation such as hunger and poverty and injustice and not take action. It doesn't mean that at all. It means that we are not disturbed. We are not disturbed while we are doing these things. See, so much of our culture tells us that we have to get angry before we do something. Right? And so much of the way that people are manipulated in society is to awaken a fear, instill a fear within them, get them angry, and then they can be manipulated to be used for whatever purpose the manipulators want. We don't have to be angry to be love in action. We don't have to be angry to do things to make the world, the human experience, a better place. But we give the best of ourselves, not from anger, but from love, from perfect peace. Gibran tells us in the prophet, he said, if you can't work with love in your heart, if you can't bake the bread as if it was for your beloved, if you can't build the house as if your beloved was going to live there, then you need to just go sit and become a beggar until you can figure out how to do it. Beg from those who can work with love in their heart. This is what I'm talking about. Work from love in our heart. Do the things that we do from love in our heart, from the peace that we already are. So this peace then that we are talking about is not a cessation of hostilities. Even if we go back and look at Old Testament scriptures, we have examples of Daniel in the lion's den and Shadrach in the furnace. And what I take from this, and I'm sure other people will take other things away from it, is that even in the midst of these seemingly terrible circumstances, we can still be at one with that peace. Even if they're doing physical harm to us, we can still be at peace. In the Sufi tradition, there's a mystic, and I hope I pronounced the name right. I mean no disrespect if I don't get it right. Al-Hallaj, I believe. And he was executed around the 9th century for having the divine experience, for so strongly realizing the unity with the oneness, to say, I am God. Not in an egotistical way, but in a factual way. It's as if the dot of light on the floor suddenly realizes, hey, I am sunlight expressing as a dot of light on the floor. And he sang and he danced on his way to his execution. He said the fundamentalists are always going to kill the mystic, which frees the mystic. See, he was not identified with the body. He was not identified with whatever pain was going to occur. but he was identified with the eternal within. He understood that his life was not dependent upon his body. He understood that whatever they could do to him was only temporary. But the love and the life and the peace within is permanent, because that's what he identified with. That's what he identified with. So we don't want to identify with the dust on the mirror. And the dust on the mirror I'm talking about is our cultural conditioning. In Buddhism, they talk about unconditioned mind and conditioned mind. The unconditioned mind, for example, is the pure mirror. The conditioned mind is the dirt on the mirror. We identify with what conditioning has taught us. And it has taught us to be afraid. It has taught us to be angry. It has taught us that in order to take action, we somehow have to whip ourselves up into a frenzy and run out in rage. Excuse me, I'm drinking some water again. You know, if you think of our culture, what our culture teaches, we are so steeped in competition, that competition brings out the best. You know, it is it is almost a religion. And yet competition may be better than not having competition, because for those who need that as motivation to do something, it may help them to want to win whatever it is that they want to win. But competition will not bring out the best. It may bring out better, but it will not bring out the best, because eventually what happens is we reach a point where cooperation is more important than competition. And you can see this in our world. You can see this in business and in politics. If people get to the top because they have been extremely good at competing, and then when they get into a position where it requires them to collaborate and cooperate, they don't know what to do. They don't know what to do. They have reached the point, their incompetence has taken them to the point as high as they can get. Our culture believes in the necessity of struggle, right? Now, next week, we're going to go back to the basics, and we're going to invite everyone to explore their concept of what God is. And much of the concept of God that we get in our culture is that God is an angry being. God is like a big, grouchy old man sitting up in the sky. I think it's Emmett Fox says, just like any Oriental despot, any Oriental dictator. Some people it likes, some people it doesn't like, other people off with their heads and send them this and send them that and punish them this way and punish them that way. And God has enemies, and the enemies have to be struck down, and all of those things, If you read the first few books of the Old Testament, there's a lot of violence in there, And what people are saying is, well, gee, those people over there have stuff that we want. But they're God's enemies, so it's okay for us to go in there and kill them and take their stuff. To me, this is human beings creating God in their own image and likeness, justifying their own desires and greed and violence. Campbell tells us that the purpose of mythology and society was to control these violent tendencies in humanity. But they didn't help us to transcend, you see. What they did was they told us that at home you don't kill. At home you don't steal. At home you don't covet your neighbor's spouse. But if those people over there are God's enemies, well, then it's okay. You can go do those things, you see. So it just kind of controlled those impulses at home, but gave them justified expressions at war. And here's the point that we have to get to, is that if we are to transcend, not just to control, but to transcend these things, then those impulses have to be dissipated, have to be dissolved, right? Instead of giving us a justifiable place to go be violent, we want to transcend those violent tendencies. So we have to bring our minds back. We're going to talk more about this next week. We have to bring our minds back to what is your concept of this thing that we call God? And if you believe in a violent and an angry God and a God that has enemies and a God that says it's okay to go over here and kill, just don't do it at home, see, you're going to find the world looks a lot like it does now. How many times do we see these terrible acts of violence, and the people who perpetrate them feel completely justified in what they did? The divine has created each and every one of us out of itself. Each and every one of us, even the people we don't like, even the people who would do us harm. The divine has created each and every one out of itself and left us alone to make the discovery. It cannot love one more than it loves another. It cannot hate one. It cannot wish ill to anyone, or send them suffering, or send them sickness, or send them pain, or teach them a lesson. It is that perfect, still glass, the mirror. If you look at that symbolism and you go to the book of Revelation, right? Remember I've mentioned to you the book of Revelation is written in symbolism because the mystical experience defies words. It is ineffable. So people try to speak of it in poetry, they try to speak of it in symbolism. And one of the symbols that we have in the book of Revelation is that the throne that God sits on is surrounded by a mirror, a lake that is perfectly still as a mirror. Perfectly still as a mirror. And near it, there is a pit. And in that pit, there is weeping and wailing and gnashing of the teeth, and there's things burning in there. Right? Now, Rocco Errico, in his unfolding, his unwrapping of the symbolism, he says, in order for us to be near the presence of the divine, in order for us to have that experience of the presence of the divine, there has to be this stillness. There has to be this perfect mirror that the Buddhists are talking about. And the dust, the ideas that we believe in that are unlike peace, they need to be thrown into that pit to be burned. And they don't go easily. You see, we don't like giving up our old ways. We kind of love our old ideas. But what about those people over there, you know? So they go kicking and screaming and weeping and wailing. So the symbolism that we want to get then is we need to get past the intellect, because peace is not an intellectual concept. Not the peace we're talking about. The peace we're talking about passes understanding. The intellectual concept of peace, I remember, you know, as a young adult, Henry Kissinger talking about it, was when we have enough nuclear weapons that we frighten them so bad they'll never use theirs, then we'll have peace. Right? That's the human idea of peace. Doomsday machines that say if we don't go in and reset this timer every so often, it will assume that we're all dead and it will just launch enough nuclear weapons to destroy the world. Right? That's the human concept of peace, of what it takes for peace. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about transcending that violence, about recognizing that it is the dust on the mirror, and by experiencing the peace directly, experience it directly. Remember I said what we know, what we believe is a result of what we have experienced largely, but there's two ways of experiencing things. One is through the five senses. One is through what our parents told us, what our teachers told us, what our clergy told us, what our politicians told us. And the other is through our personal, intuitive, inspired, revealed experience. So we know now that peace is not the cessation of hostilities. Peace is not the absence of all of these things. Peace is being still and serene and at ease in the midst of it, in the lion's den, in the furnace, if that's where we are, wherever we are, to be at ease, to be at peace, because we have identified not with the human condition, but we have identified with the spiritual truth. God is all there is. Love is all there is. Peace is all there is. Again, I'll come back to Spinoza, and I don't have it exactly right. I'm recalling it as best I can. But he said he would rather believe in the reality of spirit than in false matter. The condition of the world is it believes in the power of matter, of materialism, of willpower, right? Remember the first three chakras, and the third chakra is power and control. Power and control. We have to transcend that. We have to come to the heart. We have to start to function from love. Remember the symbol for the heart chakra is the two triangles, one pointing up and one pointing down, overlaid one on top of the other, which makes the six-pointed Star of David. We must come from the heart, not from power and control, not from fear for survival, not from the desire to dominate, but from the heart, from love. Personally, we must transcend this. Now, sometimes we say, but what about all those other people out there? How are we going to get this to all the other people out there? Well, the fact is you can't give what you don't have. You just can't. So we must focus on our personal journey. We must focus on our personal practice until we have that. And then when we have that, how to express that will be clear to us. But as long as we're looking out there, as long as we're looking at the splinter in our brother's eye and ignoring the plank in our own, you see, that's what that, to me, that's what that scripture verse means, you see. We are distracting ourselves from the real work. We are making ourselves busy with the ways of the world. Seek ye first the kingdom. What is the kingdom? The presence, the experience of the presence of the divine within. Experience the perfect peace that is within. Devote your time, devote your attention, devote your practice to dissolving the dust on the mirror. Fear. What is fear? Can the divine ever be afraid? Fear is belief in separation. Fear is belief that some other can harm or take away in some way. Can anyone harm or take away from the divine? Anyone. Anyone. Can you or I or anyone reach out and do anything at all to hurt that which is all-powerful and all-knowing? And we cannot. We cannot. Anger comes from fear. The divine can't be angry. The divine can't be afraid. We must find that place within us, within ourselves, that has never been afraid. And we must sit with it. We must sit in quiet repose. So the peace that we were talking about then is the peace that passes understanding. It is not an intellectual peace. It is an intuitive experience. And we will never find it in the world. We will never find it in the dust on the mirror. The only place we can ever find it is the only place that it is, which is within our consciousness, within the very center of our being. And the only time that we can experience it is in the now. In the now. Most important. Most important. The divine only exists in the now. Not in the past. Not in the future. In the now. The dust that is on the mirror is all from the past. I want you to think about that. It's all from the past. Did the dust get on the mirror in the future? No. Get on the mirror in the past. You see. When we are looking at truth through the distortion of the race consciousness, right? The beliefs of the human race, of our own consciousness, of all of the things that we have been taught and learned and accepted and believed that are simply not true. We are looking at the now from the past, as the past, through the past, and the past is gone. It is gone. It is no more. If we can free ourselves from believing that everything that we have experienced in the past was true, and bring ourselves to experiencing the truth that is here and now, the presence of the divine, then we can transcend. Then we can transcend. New Testament says, don't judge by appearances, judge by the righteous judgment. Things appear pretty crazy, but the truth is, the love of the divine is all that there is. So we have placed this topic of peace after finding the Christ, after Christmas experience, because until we are able to transcend the human ideas, we will never find the real peace. We will never experience the real peace. The real peace passes that understanding. It passes all of the ideas of the past. Right? The fear of Herod, the ego, who was afraid of losing his power because of the presence of the newborn king. The presence within. The presence within is the rightful ruler of our lives. So we are looking for a peace that is different than the human definition of peace. We are looking for that poise of all power and all knowledge together. What has the divine to be afraid of? What has the divine to be concerned about or worried about? It has none of those, because worry is about what might happen. Right? Regret is about what already happened. Worry and fear are in the future. Can we be in the now and be at home with the beloved? And that is our practice. That is our practice. So the tools that we use to get there. Right? First, we have to set our intention. If we don't set our intention, we can't do anything. What is it that you wish to have happen now? Right? What is it that you wish to have happen now? And in this moment, in this very moment, all I wish is to experience the presence of the divine, the conscious realization of the experience of the presence of the divine. And that can only be in the now, not in the past, not in the future, but in the now, in this very moment. In this very moment, the conscious awareness of the experience of the presence of the divine. Meditation is an important spiritual practice. because it teaches us how to get past that dust, get past the chatter of the monkey mind, get past all of these ideas that tell us, but what about this, but what about that? Shh. I like to say, get thee behind me, Satan. Shh. Right? Remember a couple of weeks ago we talked about shush, shh. We have to get beyond it. We don't stop it. Now some practitioners claim that they have actually been able to stop thought. And I believe it's possible to live in a world beyond thought, before thought. But for most of us, just not being entangled with it is a good place to start. And that's what simple meditation, that's what simple single point meditation does for us. We then become aware of areas in our life. Right? So Emma Kurz Hopkins tells us this. She says, as soon as you affirm the good, your consciousness says, but what about this? But what about this? So for example, we might say that God is all there is and God is perfect peace. And the little monkey mind chatter in the back of our head says, oh, but what about all these things that are going on in the world? What about what's going on with you and your neighbors or your boss or your coworkers or whatever? See, as soon as we affirm the good, we are presented with the appearance of the opposite. And this is our opportunity for spiritual growth, because what we can do is we can work with that to transcend that. And this is where the practice of spiritual mind treatment comes in. This is a technique where we deliberately go in and we turn our attention away from the problem to that quality of the divine that doesn't have that problem, and we identify with that. We declare our willingness to accept that, and we release that to the power that responds to us according to our belief. We read, we study, we learn new techniques, we read and we study about people who have transcended. See, until we have that experience ourselves, we take our inspiration from those who have. We must know that it is possible. We must know that other people have had these experiences. We must know that this experience of I and the Father being one is something that is possible for all of us. When we move up to the heart and then move up to our intuition or inspiration. So we read, we study, we pay attention to what we're paying attention to. We don't let our mind just go off and wander in, the dust on the mirror, and say, oh, it's dirty in there. We catch ourselves. See, this is why the shepherd's crook, the stick with the little hook on the end of it, if the little sheep started to wander too far away from the herd, as the shepherd was walking the trail with the sheep, they could reach out with that little hook and they could bring the little one back. Discipline, they could teach it to come back. They could teach it to come back. And we must be aware when our mind gets entangled in the news and the ways of the world, and we must bring it back to love. We must bring it back to love. And love is probably the easiest and the best practice of all, because love is the experience of unity. And if we find ourselves being afraid of anyone or anything, there's a separation there, right? This is why, if you go back and look at Scripture, it says, if you don't know love, you don't know God. And perfect love casts out fear. Right? If we truly knew, as the divine knows, if we truly knew that we were one with everything, that it is impossible for the divine to hurt the divine in any way, shape, or form, our fear would go away. We would transcend it. So we're closing out 2020, which has been a remarkable year in so many ways. but a remarkable opportunity for us to remember that we must go within, we must stay in the moment, we must identify with the peace that is there, we must do our spiritual practices. We must be deliberate. Holmes says we must be stubborn in our approach, in our refusal to believe that the dust on the mirror is the truth of the way things are. And we must find that still point within and be with it. So I invite you, as you set, if you do set your New Year's resolutions, put your spiritual practice at the very top of that. Identify what you're going to do. If you don't know how to do it, identify learning how to do it as your first step. Identify how much time you will put into it. Identify your support system. Who can you call on to help you? And do it. And do it. The peace already exists, but nobody can sprinkle it upon us. Right? Nobody can wave their magic wand and make it happen for us. It is an individual journey, and it is an inside journey. If we go through the year, and we do our practice, and we take our time, and we transcend the belief system of the world, and we find that presence within and stay with it, the beloved, as the Sufis call it, we will be that peace. You already are that peace, and now you are revealing that peace. And so it is.